So this is a basic brick texture that's being plugged into a plane in Blender, and I'm going to show you some things that you can't do with this basic brick texture. So let's say you wanted to bevel these corners. They give us this mortar smooth, but as you can see, it doesn't bevel these corners, it just adds a gradient to these edges. Also, the space in between these bricks gets changes as we change this mortar smoothness, which isn't really the effect that I think a lot of people want, because technically this interior, the interior of each brick, that isn't changing, but the edges, the exterior edges are. But anyway, you can't actually bevel these corners. Also, this is a gradient, so when we add a height map, we can see that these are just straight. I have this at a fair amount of subdivisions, but I'll scale it so that this thing gets even bigger so we can get a better look. When we look at this, let's increase mortar smoothness. This is straight. There's a little bit of roundness just because of my subdivisions aren't perfect with this thing, but this is straight. I mean, this is not the roundness that we want on bricks probably, and a lot of other things. So that's just another thing that we can't do in standard Blender. Also, another thing I don't like is this mortar size. It's really, really small. So when we go up and down, this increments by 0.1, and that's just way, way too big. So whenever we want to change this, we have to come in here and change it every single time by hand. I mean, kind of sucks. This bias, I'm okay with that. I don't care. But also, let's say we wanted to add a texture to each one of these bricks. Like maybe we want to add some cracks on the edges, or maybe we want to add a Verona texture or just a noise texture, but just on these bricks. Usually what we'd have to do is we'd add a noise texture, and then we would multiply this by the factor. Oh, you know what, let's do a little bit more math so we just get the bricks. So this right here, when we subtract it, we'll get just the flat colors of these bricks, and so we'll multiply that by the noise, and then here we will get noise just on the bricks. So okay, I mean, and we can also do that with a Voronoi. Let's do here. Maybe we change it to distance to edge. We can do something like that. Okay. But you see, if we scale this mortar size down, that everything just bleeds, every brick will bleed into every other brick. Which is not what we want. I mean, we want every single brick to have a different texture, basically. It would be nice if we could rotate each brick's UV so that the Voronois don't line up. And we could do this, I mean, Voronois can also be used for cracks. So this scale might be something like this for cracks. And I mean, here you're only looking at 2 bricks, but even here you can see that this is just, it's bleeding over way too much, and there's no uniqueness to each brick. I mean, yeah, there's absolutely no uniqueness to each brick. And this is something that was changed with my new node. So here's the same setup but with my brick nodes. So this brick size is actually equal to what it would be in Blender. So if this has a width of 1, it would actually be a width of 1 out here. And then let's look at some of the other things. We've got the border thickness. That does what you'd expect, changes the width between each brick. Then we have the brick bevel. So here it actually bevels the edges, pretty sick, between 0 and 1. And then the internal bevel. So here, this is just the mask, but let's look at the rounded height. There's 2 different height maps, but we'll look at that in a sec. the internal bevel goes from 0 to 1. And like before, how there was the internal section that had a gradient applied until it hit the corners, this is how much the internal section goes to the edge. So that goes between 0 and 1. And let's plug it into the height map. So if we now, we're now looking at the height map, we can see that this is rounded. That all these corners, edges, they're all rounded. Okay? And if you like the way that it was before with the flat, we can still use this flat height map. Okay? Pretty cool. We can change the scale. I'm going to change it back to round. And yeah, we can see as we change the internal bevel, it gets closer and closer to the outside until it's square again. So we get a top view. It's still beveled, but it's just straight down. Okay, and then some unique features about this node is that we have the position of each brick. And then we also have the UVs, so there's a UV map for every single brick centered at the center of each brick. And that can be used for a lot of cool things that I'll show now. So let's say I want a Voronoi texture that's unique to each brick. Well, let's just start off with a Voronoi. I'm going to change this to distance to edge. And then for every brick, I want the Voronoi texture to be rotated. So for every brick, it's going to have a unique position. If I add it to a noise texture for each position, there's a new number between 0 and 1. If I'm planning to use this as a rotation vector, I want this numbered between 0 and 360. And then turn this into a vector. It's going to be on the z-axis. That's what will give it that rotation. And then we need a mapping. So this is going to the rotation, and what I'm going to rotate is the original UV map. So I'm going to shift right click, drag this to make this little node, press G to change its position, do it again. And here we go. And now you can see that it sometimes there's an edge and sometimes there's not. When that happens, it's usually just because the scale isn't very high. But also I want the mortars back, so I'm gonna take this Voronoi, I'm gonna multiply it by our mask. And there we go. And just to prove that it's working, let's change the border to 0, and you can see there's no more bleed over from each brick. And there you go. Change the Voronoi to be something like we'd see with cracks. Change the noise so that there's a little bit more rotation between each one. And there you go. We can also use this position to make a different color for every single cube or brick. But in this case, I just used 11 nodes to make this Rubik's Cube, which is pretty cool. We just use the position, plug it in a noise texture, throw it through a ramp to get us a random color here. You have to change the color ramp from linear to constant. Throw the color ramp into a scale, because right now this grader then controls how much of that beveled part will get this color. So if you set it to 1 or really close to 1, then it gets this flat square like you would on a normal Rubik's Cube. And then yeah, just throw that into the color. I just added this into the normal vector, and that's basically it. Alright, so that was just a few examples of things that you can do with this new brick node, and And I just also showed things that you can't do with the normal brick texture. So I'll have more videos about and the brick node will be on Gumroad and Blender Market, and the link should be in the description. Thanks.